sir.
Those are delicious.
All right, good evening and welcome to the final night of the December meetings of the Planning Commission. Tonight, we have two items on our agenda. We're going to be hearing zoning amendments on elder care and also the request to advertise for the reprint of the general land use plan. I don't see any public speakers in our audience, but if we do have any folks outside, please turn in your speaker slips to Ms. Johnson, our clerk, before she calls the agenda item if you are intending to speak on it. So with that, Madam Clerk, can you please call the next agenda item?
Tonight's agenda starts with item number 4, ZOA-2019-11. This is an ordinance to amend, reenact, and recodify several Arlington County zoning articles, and we have quite a few of them. Okay, we have Nick Rogers and Clifton Hogan, our planning and zoning staff, to present this item this evening.
Mr. Rogers, Mr. Hogan, good evening. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair, Madam Clerk, members of the Commission. We're very excited to be here before you tonight. We've been working very hard over the past year. You've seen some of the fruits of that labor periodically as we've checked in with you throughout 2019 on a significant long-term effort to modernize and update our zoning standards pertaining to a family of uses that we've been coining as elder care uses. And so these... Thank you. When we speak of elder care, we're talking about supportive housing for seniors and other residents that the Code of Virginia uses that term aged, infirm, or disabled. But we're talking about assisted living, independent living, nursing homes, and continuing care retirement communities. We do have some of these in operation in Arlington right now. Unfortunately, we haven't had a new facility developed in about 20 years here, and there's a host of different factors that go into that, some of which are some significant regulatory limitations and challenges that we feel like are being corrected with this study. And so what distinguishes this from conventional multifamily development or age-restricted housing, I know Hunters Park has been a recently approved development that's come up a lot, and what makes this family of uses different is the centralized dining, the offering of personal care services, whether it's med management, assistance with various activities of daily living by the staff, along with the plethora of different amenities and classes and benefits that are afforded that really distinguishes this family of uses from typical multifamily or other mixed-use development. And so looking back to even just a few months ago in taking a look at our zoning ordinance, we really only were permitting assisted living in our SD district. Those of you who've been on the commission for a while know that we have a very limited number of parcels zoned SD, Virginia Hospital Center being the main establishment that's zoned SD. And so very limited number of areas in the county which could be permitted for just an assisted living facility. And the story wasn't much better for nursing homes. You can take a look at your viewer here, and we've highlighted the parcels that are zoned either CO 1.0, 1.5, 2.5. This dates back to when those districts were first incorporated into the zoning ordinance back in the 1970s. It's not clear to us why nursing home were a permitted use, but they were in those districts, and that's been carried forward with the 2013 reformat. And so knowing that we have 14% of our residents that are above the age of 60, knowing that that is a percentage, not just here in Arlington County, but nationwide, is going to continue to grow, and given that dearth in the development of new communities, we knew we had some regulatory challenges that we needed to address immediately. And so as Mr. Hogan takes us through to the next slide, we first started with you back in September, where we made an initial phase of the ordinance where we We sort of combined assisted living and nursing. We made sure that those were permitted in those existing districts, the 4 that we had. But then we also added the RA 818 district as well. And we've consistently said throughout the course of our study and in our scoping that comparatively, we on staff feel that multifamily uses and elder care uses are both housing types and both fairly analogous and compatible to one another. We see a pretty natural fit between the two. Taking a look, and back in September, we were very clear to you and said we are coming back. We're going to be back by the end of the year with the broader study's recommendations. And so you see from your staff report tonight and on the viewer that we are proposing that the full complement of elder care uses be permitted in up to 18 of our commercial and mixed-use zoning districts. And so this is a map that we used at our October community forum, where we aggregated those zoning districts together for just the visual cue for our forum attendees to see, so we could have a better representation on where these uses were going to be permitted in the county. And it tracks very closely to where we are prioritizing commercial and mixed-use development along our major corridors, which are best served by public transit, natural locations for these types of uses. We've heard consistently, even going back to the March community forum that our DHS colleagues hosted, the Community Forum on Aging, where our seniors, many of them have lived here their entire lives. They've invested in the community. They want to stay active in the cultural amenities, take advantage of those transportation investments and opportunities. And so we've considered that feedback in coming up with this recommendation before you tonight. We are recommending that we use the site plan process. There's a lot of variety. We touch on this in the staff report. A lot of variety between providers. A lot of variety between different development sites as well. And so the site plan process gives all of us the best tool to evaluate those transportation challenges, impacts, context on nearby neighborhoods as well. And it also gives the providers the flexibility through county board modifications to tailor the site to the specific needs of the community surrounding it. You'll see that we've carried forward the bulk, height, density standards that would be already permitted for multifamily, particularly in those mixed-use districts, the commercial mixed-use districts. We wanted to make sure that there was an even playing field between elder care providers and multifamily providers, again, to try to spur that development activity and to remove those regulatory barriers. We did want to pay special attention to our RA districts. We have multifamily zoning in close proximity to those major transportation corridors, but also in areas that are not near those major transportation corridors, often right next to low-density residential developments. And so we felt that special attention was needed to put specific development standards regulating height, floor area ratio, and also mandating a minimum lot size. We don't have the same, for lack of a better word, sort of district-wide carrying capacity of public open space and amenities and activity in a lot of our lower density areas, oftentimes zoned RA. And so we wanted to make sure that those development sites have enough space on site for adequate parking, pickup and drop off, access for first responders as well. And so you'll see from the standards that height was very important to us. We spoke to you about this in September. We do want those heights to stay firm and not modifiable by the board, but if a provider can make a case for a smaller site or an increased FAR and can still meet and acknowledge the surrounding neighborhood context, those would be open to modification through the site plan process. And we're seeing, particularly Commissioners Siegel and Begley have seen some of the catalyst of this work. You're seeing an image and a rendering from Artist Senior Living's recent submission. I see recent, they've been in process for several months now, but you'll be reviewing this in greater detail next Thursday as you convene your SPRC for this development site at the corner, proposal at the corner of Lee Highway and North Taylor Street. We talked a lot about parking, particularly bringing in our DES colleagues, looking at prevailing trends. We heard that parking, honestly, we heard that parking was a bit of a challenge with a lot of our existing operators, and that kind of makes sense to us when you compare some of the parking ratios that were utilized at those development sites back in the 80s and 90s, just comparatively today, and speaking with providers, more staff, higher frequency of traffic and visitors, more of those caregivers, non-employee caregivers that we've spoken about to you in Zoco. There's just a need for more parking comparatively today. That being said, we wanted to make sure that the proposed parking rate reflected our adopted policies, whether the comprehensive plan and others, on prioritizing public transit, not over parking sites, making sure our parking standards match quite closely, and if not being aggressive when it comes to matching the utilization and demand of a user. And so we feel that we've done that, and these proposed parking rates track closely with the development trends that we're seeing in recent elder care development. You'll also see a series of editorial changes and updates in terminology, some new definitions. We've made some updates to Article 12 to our use categories. Very, very important to us on the zoning administration side to ensure that as this family of uses continues to evolve, that we have good use categories and good terminology in place if we need to issue use determinations to reflect even future changes to elder care and senior living that we perhaps aren't even contemplating right now. Our ground game on this was pretty extensive. I already mentioned the community forum back in October, but we've done stakeholder interviews with providers. We've done several site visits. We've been to Zoco twice. Mr. Hogan and I will be checking in with our Housing Commission later this evening across the hall as they take action and take a position to inform the board on their sentiments on this study. So we've checked in with a lot of folks and incorporated that feedback into your staff report tonight, as well as our counterparts in NAOP. As Mr. Hogan and I ran the community forum, we had an afternoon and evening session. We had a robust conversation where we confirmed our initial sentiment that folks in the community really care about this. They really want seniors to be taken care of. They see the need that's coming, and we had a robust conversation about all sorts of different housing challenges for older residents. Of course, our scope here is limited to just the elder care uses, but we were careful to document that feedback in an appendix of your staff report this evening. We make mention in a couple different parts of our report that this is an initiative that's being conducted under our Housing Arlington banner. I think that one of the #1 themes of the community feedback was, of course, the incredible costs that can come with the monthly charges for someone who's in an assisted living, independent, or a nursing community. If there's one message that we want to relay to members of the community, members of the Planning Commission board, is that we recognize that, we hear that, and we appreciate that. We have regulations in place already. I've cited our affordable dwelling unit ordinance, which do trigger affordability commitments. Our prevailing thought is that most providers will likely opt for the cash contribution per the formulas specified in the affordable housing ordinance. But there are some options, some flexible options for a provider to meet that zoning ordinance requirement that's in place currently right now. And we've been comparing the affordability discussions, not just here in Arlington, but with some of our jurisdictional counterparts. We know that our counterparts in Fairfax County have done a recent text amendment of their own that was also coupled with updates to their comprehensive plan, really prioritizing and recommending cash contributions on a per square foot basis for elder care uses being billed as continuing care facilities there. And the City of Alexandria also very, very direct in their recommendations for a low to moderate income assisted living facility within the city limits to serve the city residents there. Our affordable housing master plan does acknowledge the need of housing for seniors, mentioning accessible housing, affordable linkages to services, not as direct as some of our neighboring jurisdictions. And we acknowledge that, particularly some of the strong advocacy from our Commission on Aging, who we've visited a couple times this year, and who's submitted written comment to you this evening. We have made a commitment to revisit these issues as we review the Affordable Housing Master Plan, again, under the Housing Arlington banner in the coming year. We remain on track. We're here before you tonight. We are on schedule to have public hearings in front of the county board this month. We are recommending approval of the text in front of you. As we were preparing the staff report, we took a last look at several of the zoning districts, and originally we had not regarded C3 as a compatible district. You take a look at the purpose and intent of that district and how it's utilized, and it really is, it's not a district that is intended to be used for mixed use, for residential uses, really small scale commercial and retail. But then after factoring how C3 is one of the primary tools and one of the districts that is available as part of the Clarendon revitalization overlay for that type of mixed-use development, for residential development, we realized that we had made an oversight. And so we do have an RTA also before you tonight. We're hoping to come back in January with just a small patch to the ordinance to simply insert C3 into the use table as well, which would bring us up to 19 zoning districts where elder care uses would be permitted. And I think with that, Mr. Chair, Mr. Hogan and I would be happy to answer your questions. Great.
Mr. Rogers, thank you for that comprehensive presentation, and thank you to you, Mr. Hogan, for all your good work leading up to this point. I don't believe we have any public speakers with us. Okay. And any, I don't see any commissions. Okay. So then the conversation is then with the commission. Commissioner Weir cannot be with us this evening, but he has before us his report from ZOCO. As Mr. Rogers mentioned, we had several ZOCO meetings about this, and he kind of covered, I think, some of the main pieces of conversation. His report here does not identify many outstanding issues for us to consider, but does include several discussion items for us to potentially walk through. I think I'd like to add to that the RTA component. So if we have questions about that.
I have a question about the 1 acre minimum.
Okay. That's good.
We will follow Commissioner Weir's outline.
That's correct. So we're going to follow that, and then we've added the RTA, we've added the 1 acre minimum. I personally have a question about the RC district in addition to the RA 716. So it's been along a similar line, but if folks have kind of particular questions about any of there's not many of us this evening, so I think we can be a little bit more flexible if people have questions. Any other topics people want to discuss? The parking, I think, are any questions about that? We do have the parking here on the list. Any additional? Okay. All right, let's start at the top. Any questions sort of about the kind of height? Yes, Commissioner Siegel.
Could we just get staff to expound its position? Commissioner Weir notes that staff is recommending a 60-foot height maximum in RA 716, whereas the district-wide height is higher. Can you just enlighten us?
So the height limits were connected to the site plan limits that are in Article 15, I believe, and like these are the district height limits for the various RA districts when they are under site plan approval.
Mr. Hogan, could you bring your microphone a little bit closer to you?
Sorry.
Or speak
Yes.
a little louder?
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, sir.
So I'm a little confused, because with a site plan, presumably you could go higher. So am I not understanding the issue?
Maybe I'm not. So you're concerned
No, it's
that
just a
the-
question. We have a discussion topic suggested by Commissioner Weir, who's not here, unfortunately, whether to recommend a 60-foot height maximum in RA 716 or recommend the maximum height be the district maximum of 95 feet. So staff's position is to recommend 60-foot height maximum? I'm just confused. I was just wondering why you
Okay.
wouldn't go with the district.
So that district height limit is really for larger sites, at least 100,000 acres.
Oh, I see,
And that's kind of like prior to the current iteration in the zoning ordinance.
see.
That was the, for multifamily development, you basically had two options. One, you could develop under the RA 1426, which didn't have any minimum site size limits, but you also were limited to, I think, 35, 45 feet in height. With the RA 716, even though you could develop a taller building, but you needed to have a site that was at least 100,000 square feet. And if you had that 100,000 square feet and you went to the county board to get a site plan, you could go up to the 95 feet, 10 stories that was allowed. The reason why we went with the 60 feet
As a matter of zoning, not as part of a site plan,
Right,
as part of the zoning category.
correct.
I see. But that makes sense to me.
Okay. Commissioner Gearin.
No, that was well answered. Thank you very much, Staff.
I was wondering if staff could speak to the zoning language for RC. It's page 9 of 20 in the zoning text. Just hoping for some clarity, either Mr. Rogers or Mr. Hogan, about the height under multifamily dwellings and elder use. My understanding was that the maximum height for RC was 95 feet, or is it 90 feet? 95, right? And it shows 65 feet here. And I was just wondering if you could clarify kind of the amendments here. And what the maximum height would be for elder care.
Commissioner Scholl, our intent in the ordinance was to simply carry forward, as we mentioned in the presentation, whatever the maximum height is for RC and our other commercial mixed-use districts, whatever that maximum height for multifamily, we wanted the same for elder care as well. Per the text, my presumption is that 65 is the maximum in RC. I'm hearing you with an understanding that you feel that the maximum height for multifamily in RC is 95 feet. Am I understanding you correctly, sir?
My understanding was that the maximum height for RC was taller than 65 feet. And that we've seen several projects during my 4.5 years on the commission that could go at least to 90 feet, perhaps 95 feet. And it is a hard cutoff. It's inclusive of the mechanical, and there is no ability to modify height in RC. So understanding that, but I never understood it to be a 65-foot. And so I understand your explanation of RA 716. That makes some sense in the edge condition. But RC, we generally have that bordering
Sure.
our right along kind of our arterials in more dense urban areas where 95 feet seems appropriate. And so I was also, this sort of jumped out to
Yeah.
me.
Unfortunately, I don't have, and you know, you prepare and then you always forget something. And today I forgot my copy of the full zoning ordinance. And unfortunately, I don't have all of the RC district standards in front of me. My presumption is that we've got some other district standards in RC that set that condition that you're describing to go up to 95 feet through the site plan process. And what we'll do is we'll flag your comment just to triple check to ensure that there's nothing about an elder care use that would be precluded from that higher height.
Yeah, that would be my only request is you look at that. So that's great. Commissioner Hughes, appreciate that.
Just for staff, I believe on the latest iteration, you'll look in section 7.3.4 under site plans, condition A, or excuse me, condition C, under the RC category, which will point you in the direction of the 95-foot height limit.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes.
But the regular district does have, but there's a little nuance.
Some subtext. Commissioner McSweeney.
I have a question on the heights as well, but it's a general question, and that is that with any of these elder care uses, any of these different housing types, would there be an opportunity to get bonus density as a result of offering a more affordable units? Is that something that's negotiable, or is this a hard limit?
As far as the height limit goes, yeah. So elder care uses would be the bonus density provisions that were adopted by the board last month. They would be applicable here, and so if I'm recalling those correctly, those bonus height provisions were removed from the ordinance and really delegated to whatever the sector or area plan heights would be recommended. So those would be the target heights.
Okay, so thank you for that reminder. I can't believe I forgot it so soon.
No worries.
So bonus density, yes. Bonus height, no.
They would follow those regulations. Yes, ma'am.
Anything else on height? Any other questions? All right, let's move on to parking. Yes, Commissioner Siegel.
This is a very interesting question, and I'm glad it's that Commissioner Weir has written. How should the parking requirements be distributed? Units, bedrooms, per staff report. So maybe you could just talk a little bit beds or some other metric. I think when we heard the artist's presentation, we were made aware of, and it's common sense that with certain care models, you will have outside therapists. So that's an echelon of visitor parking that you'd have to account for. Then the other sort of conundrum is with assisted living, you can have different size units. So it kind of feels uneven. So it's, if you could tell me what your thinking has been about that. Or can you make different categories? So if you have a memory care facility, for example, and maybe you have a lot of therapists coming in, maybe that's one permutation of what you might need. And so maybe it's not just one size fits all.
So I'll talk a little bit about our thinking on parking, and I hope that fills in some of the blanks that perhaps we left in the staff report. But really speaking, in speaking with providers in doing our site visits and looking at staff report approvals from different jurisdictions, we found that whether it was assisted living with memory care, assisted living blended with independent living, we were seeing pretty consistently across the board, and providers telling this to our face, that most of the time that prevailing parking rate was somewhere about 0.6 or 0.7 parking spaces per unit. And you happen upon a good point on what is a unit. And that was one of the catalysts for this study, that a dwelling unit in assisted living. Think about those care providers that are coming in, care providers coming from outside. The parking impacts, the staffing implications are very different. And so we wanted to, we originally started in with a per unit parking requirement for at least assisted living and independent living. But then we decided to go to per bedroom because different providers describe units differently. And I'll give you a great example. There are some providers that will say, okay, this assemblage, this living quarters is a unit. And there's there'll be a common kitchen, a common gathering area with 2 bedrooms, and each of those bedrooms would be independently rented out, essentially as efficiency dwellings to folks who are not related or have not chosen to be in that, again, quote unquote, unit together. And so to account for that variety amongst the different providers, and again, you're exactly right, it's hard to standardize. We felt we could more adequately standardize a half space per bedroom. A bedroom is a bedroom. A unit is not always a unit. I hope that fills in a little bit.
It does. And thank you for the review of the marketplace and how providers are experiencing that issue.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Siegel. Any other questions on parking? All right, let's move along to the 1 acre minimum. Commissioner Lantelmi?
Yeah, I'm still not entirely sure that you can probably enlighten me on this, that it makes sense in that zoning district. Don't we have multi-unit buildings that are on less than an acre? Or maybe we don't. I'm not sure.
I'd be astonished if we didn't, actually.
Okay. Then why wouldn't we allow one of these facilities to be on less than an acre?
So again, our thinking on the 1 acre minimum was we didn't want to, we wanted the provider to be coming to the county with an adequate development site to handle the parking, the traffic circulation, all of that level of activity. You saw that picture from our presentation that had that literally a happy hour at an assisted living facility in Falls Church. And we just wanted to make sure that those development sites had adequate space to fit that all on site and to not have spillover into the neighboring communities. Less of a concern for us, as we mentioned, in commercial mixed-use districts, Roslyn Ballston Corridor, what have you. But we did want to be sensitive, particularly with, we did want to be sensitive to keeping that development activity on site when in close proximity to lower density single-family neighborhoods.
Okay. How large is the artist site?
It's 2.8 acres.
And how large is it's not the same district, but there is that facility in, I guess it's Virginia Square?
Yeah.
Do you know what size that lot is?
I believe that's the Brookdale site. Is that the old Marriott that we met? Yeah.
Old Emeritus site?
Yes, that's correct. That would be a very small site. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'd be astonished if it was more than an acre. Commissioner Lane, tell me.
And that's why I'm wondering that, again, it's not the same district, so. And
That's
it is
correct.
very easy to get to transit, so presumably a number of the employees there are using that. I understand that. But it would still be interesting to see to what extent that works with the parking that goes in and out. And anything that would restrict the possible use of sites for this use, I'm sort of nervous about by putting an artificial barrier. Is there any way it could be done for, an exception could be made, that if somebody comes in and says, okay, we have a TDM here, that even though we're away from this, we still have this program that we can minimize the amount of parking we need, that would keep it out of the neighborhood, that sort of thing, that it could be built on 3/4 of an acre, let's say, or half an acre. Is there any flexibility that would allow something like that?
Yes, there is. So the minimum lot area, the minimum 1 acre requirement would be a modifiable provision through the site plan process. And so if a provider had a half acre, 3/4 of an acre, and could demonstrate to staff, you and the board, members of the community, that there wouldn't be those adverse impacts on the surrounding neighborhood, if the developer can make a case, we would be able to entertain those exceptions. The ordinance would not preclude that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you. Other questions on the 1 acre? All right, let's move on to the RTA. Any questions about C3? Seems pretty straightforward. So thank staff for kind of doing that research and doing that RTA. So I guess one quick question, is that coming back to us? I presume it would not, correct? It's just going to go back to the board? Because it's a minor amendment, or will it come back to us?
It would come back to you, yes. Yeah, so you would have, presuming the board adopts the RTA, you would have a public hearing on your January agenda.
Okay, just for C3. Okay.
Just for C3. And I do want to thank Ms. Smith for flagging that for us with her
You're adding things to our
knowledge and
January
experience
agenda.
on the Clarendon sector plan. That was an oversight on our part.
Well, that's good work. Commissioner Siegel.
I do have another topic. Sure. The Housing Conservation District. And I would ask that question, what are the links? Are there any? And I would ask that question, if you could answer it, in light of what you have found about the financing of these types of facilities. I think are they all private? If they're tied into the Housing Conservation District system of supporting buildings that need some sort of upgrade, I guess it is a question about demand and the financing of such facilities. Is that very vague?
As far as the link to housing conservation,
there is none.
There really isn't.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here, one of the things that was.
Do people buy their units? They rent their units, and that's all in the private market, right? You've not come across subsidized assisted living, subsidized nursing homes, things like that?
So we have a nonprofit organization, Goodwin House. Some of you may have heard of Goodwin House.
Yes.
And so they're a nonprofit provider. So there are nonprofits who do operate elder care uses. One of the things that was impressed upon us most by our interviews with the providers was the differences between the housing costs, so the cost to do the landscaping, to keep the lights on, painting, various building maintenance type thing. And those costs can, by and large, be standardized on a per resident basis. You can sort of operationalize those. The real challenge, and this is what makes this family of uses very different from conventional multifamily is that the service costs, the care costs needed for those residents to assist with those activities of daily living, it's virtually impossible to standardize those because a person
Different needs.
different needs. There are very, very different needs across, and that will be the topic that is of greatest challenge for us as we continue these affordability discussions with Housing Arlington. So as far as financing sources, I wouldn't be able to provide much enlightenment on that, but I hope that sheds a little bit.
That was kind of where I was going. I know that there are different models. There's an insurance model, and there's a purchase model, and then my sister went through this, but I was interested in what you were hearing.
Yeah, we're hoping that the zoning standards really mostly get out of the way of those types of conversations.
Just facilitate.
Focus on the land
what's over
use.
there. Yeah.
That's right.
All right, thank you. Commissioner McSweeney.
Thank you. I should have said this back when we were talking about the parking. I just wanted to express appreciation for the explanations that you gave on 8 and 9 about the thinking for the parking and the differentiation between the assisted living, independent living being per bedroom, and the nursing home being per bed. And I thought that made a lot of sense, and I just thank you for that. I also wanted to say I was really happy that you gave us attachment 3, which is the community forum overview. I thought that was very informative, so thank you for including that.
Any other kind of topics people want to discuss? All right, before we get to motions, I do want to commend you, Mr. Rogers and Mr. Hogan, for your great work on this. You both done really, really great work on this project, and we've gotten some letters from folks that were passed along to the commission, people who had worked with you on this as well, and I'm sure you've seen them, but they sing your praises as well. So you were both to be commended for that, and the lengths that you've gone to kind of immerse yourself in this work. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And it's definitely a really great staff report. I would concur with my colleagues on that. So I'm going to turn to Commissioner Hughes for motions.
Thank you, Commissioner Scholl. For those of you who are trying to read along, I'm on the bottom of Commissioner Weir's possible motions, which I believe are simply the staff motions. So if anybody has any objection, let me know now. But as much as I enjoy making motions to fail, but
I mean,
Well, that's true. Do you need
I-
sugar or anything before you start?
Commissioner Hughes, I was giving you these because to
soft pitches, I got you. Here we go.
Softball for you.
We're all a little tired, I know. The Planning Commission recommends that the county board, or I move that the Planning Commission recommend the county board adopt the attached ordinance to amend, reenact, and recodify Articles 4, 6, 7, 12, 14, and 18 of the Arlington County zoning ordinance to permit the establishment of assisted living facilities, independent living facilities, nursing homes, and continuing care retirement communities in 14 zoning districts, to establish new definitions for undefined terms and revise existing definitions, to establish new minimum parking standards for elder care uses, to add site plan criteria and findings for elder care uses to the residential use standards, to revise and update the terminology used in the household living and group living residential use categories, and to make other editorial changes for the purposes of clarity as shown in attachment 1 of the staff report provided.
Second.
seconded by Commissioner Gearin. Any discussion, amendment? Hearing none, all in favor, please raise your hand. Unanimous. Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you. I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the county board adopt the attached resolution to authorize advertisement of public hearings by the Planning Commission on January 13th, 2020, and by the county board on January 25th, 2020, to consider proposed amendments to the Articles 7 and 12 of the Arlington County zoning ordinance, as shown in attachment 4 of the staff report, to promote elder care uses in the C3 zoning district on lots within the Clarendon Revitalization District as designated on the general land use plan.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Gearin again. Any discussion or amendment? Hearing none, all in favor? Great, unanimous. thank you again to staff for your presentation tonight and for your work on this, and we will see you in January. Madam Clerk, can you please call the next item?
Item number 5 is a request to advertise the 2020 GLUT reprint. We have Kelly Brown, our planning staff, to present this item this evening.
Good evening, Ms. Brown. Welcome.
All right, thank you. This is a request to advertise the reprinting of the general land plan in 2020. No changes in policy are recommended. This is a reprint that's done on a periodic basis since 1961, in fact, with the adoption of the first general land use plan, to capture amendments that have been adopted during the prior period following the prior reprint, and to make formatting changes as appropriate. So to continue, as I was saying, in the last 30 years, the general land use plan has been reprinted on a regular basis. And since in those 30 years, it's been reprinted 1986, 1996, 2004, and then most recently in 2011. In 2011, we began the process of actually, though, updating the map digitally on a biannual basis to capture amendments that had been approved during that prior 6-month period. So this reprint effort is an opportunity to formalize all of those amendments and changes made since the 2011 reprint. Also, though, to introduce a new public facility map and tables to feature facilities not otherwise documented in other comprehensive plan elements. This reprint is also proposed to update formatting and the narrative in the map and booklet to support the addition of new material and policies relevant for the GLUT map and booklet adopted over time. Documenting correct errors that have been identified through regular use, yet not previously addressed through prior administrative updates, and apply new approaches to communicate various elements of the map and booklet. So I'll now walk through the changes that are proposed to the GLUT map itself. So in terms of the actual content of the map, there is only one change proposed to a map designation, and then several changes to labels. So the designation change that we're recommending is pertaining to a small area of general commercial. It is the last vestige of general commercial on the map, adjacent to an area that had been amended from general commercial to high OAH with the approval of the Wendy site plan 435. We always knew that there was this one last remaining piece of general commercial on the map, and upon looking at it more closely, determined that it was actually right-of-way. It's not an actual parcel that pertain to this small area, and right-of-way should actually be designated white with a black line. It doesn't. It's not appropriate to have a land use designation. So with this reprint, we'd like to remove that last remaining piece of general commercial to have that reflect its status as right-of-way rather than a parcel. The map, we also propose to update labels to reflect current naming. Some of the most notable examples of that would be changing the name of Knock to Green Valley, Washington. Liberty is now reflected on the map, Bosman Government Center. There's several others as well. Jefferson Davis Highway is now labeled as Richmond Highway. So updates to the legend are also proposed. The first is a formatting and presentation recommendation that's to consolidate all of the symbols and designations and asterisks the single and double asterisks into one consolidated legend for ease of use. We are also recommending to add a symbol for right-of-way. This is kind of following on that examination of that general commercial designation and how it is appropriate to call out more specifically on the map that areas that are shaded white with black lines are right-of-way. We're updating the metro symbol to clarify that as existing stations. Also making a technical correction to add CO Crystal City to the high OAH category. We're also proposing to rename the Coordinated Mixed-Use Development District, which typically refers to a zoning district, to the Coordinated Mixed-Use Development designation. We are also recommending to add some additional notation to the single and double asterisks. This is to relocate some of the information that's currently found in the notes that's not specific to an actual district, but more about how to interpret the designations. We're trying to pull all of that into the legend. So for the single asterisks, we are proposing to add information from one of the notes to clarify that where a mix is shown with striping, that indicates the percentage of use that should be applied. For the double asterisks, we are recommending to add language from one of the notes to clarify that where a parcel or an area is designated as public but privately owned, that the underlying zoning is what prevails in determining the use. And then finally, the most notable change would be to remove the general commercial designation actually from the legend. Now that we no longer have any general commercial on the map, it appeared that that might be an appropriate thing to do. So we did an evaluation and determined that since there are other newer designations, such as our mixed-use designations and our office apartment hotel designations to indicate where commercial development is appropriate, that we no longer needed the general commercial designation. The zoning districts that corresponded with general commercial, CTH, C2, and C3, they have a home in other designations. So with these findings, we do recommend it's appropriate to remove general commercial. That said, however, if in the future we ever felt like the general commercial designation might be appropriate, we could certainly bring it back. And then finally on the map itself, we have some recommendations for the notes. The first one is just from a presentation perspective to move it all into the bottom right corner, so it's no longer kind of cascading around the side of the map. And then removing the three notes that didn't really fall into the same category as the majority of the notes which pertain to districts, and all of that has been moved into the legend itself. Okay, I'll now walk through the changes that are recommended for the booklet. So the changes to the booklet fall into a few main categories, kind of moving chapter by chapter through the booklet. The first group of recommendations is to make some changes to the purpose and scope of the GLUP booklet section. We'd like to add some language specifically tying the general land use plan to the Code of Virginia. We'd also like to add a list of land use designations and symbols from the GLUP map to the booklet for ease of use. In doing so, we're also recommending to add brief descriptions of what the symbols mean to the booklet. Highlighted here, those that have been identified as being appropriate for some additional description in the booklet. We've added some narrative to the history section of the booklet to reflect the reprinting that we are recommending at this time. And then we are recommending a substantial change to the last half of the booklet to streamline two sections and create a new section called the supporting documents section, which really seeks to retain all of the descriptions of listings of ordinances and plans that support the GLUP, and then eliminate references to outdated documents that aren't part of the comprehensive plan. That material lives online now and is easily available for those who need it. For the special GLUF studies, we are recommending to add a list of what those studies are and where they're located. And then we've recommended to make some changes throughout the booklet to reflect changes in policy and plans that have been happening over the past 10 years. For example, we're removing all of the references to the streetcar. There was some language in there about Crystal City, the designations before the sector plan was adopted. We didn't feel like that was really needed any longer. And then finally, recommending some other editorial changes listed here. We've updated Appendix 2 to include all the special planning districts and adopted plans that hadn't necessarily been captured. We removed Appendix 3, the Housing Conservation District maps, because we're recommending to include hyperlinks in the booklet itself that would take you to the map, so they no longer need to be found in the booklet. This is going to be moving forward much more of an online document than something that would be printed and distributed. All of the labeling that's happening on the map, those updates will also carry through into the booklet. And then finally, we needed to make some updates to the TDR policy to reflect some changes that have been made for the Courthouse Square District and Fort Myer Heights North that just hadn't been incorporated in the past. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt to talk about the public facility map and tables.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Matt Ladd, Planning Division staff. So I'd like to take a little bit of a step back to why we're doing this now. During the last 5-year review of the comprehensive plan, which is something that by state code staff and the Planning Commission every 5 years will review the comprehensive plan. In the last review, which was in 2017, the Planning Commission recommended that the county initiate a process to develop and adopt comprehensive plan elements for schools and public facilities. And some of you may be aware that earlier this year, the county board and the school board directed their respective staffs to develop a scope for a public facilities plan. And a committee of the Joint Facilities Advisory Commission, that committee is chaired by Commissioner McSweeney, is actually providing guidance on the scope for that work. So that committee has been meeting since July. So that process is in its early stages. We're at least a couple years away from having an adopted public facilities plan. So staff is proposing at this time to take the opportunity of the GLUP reprint to add a new public facility map and a table to the GLUP to document existing and approved facilities. So this could be similar to other comp plan elements where we had policies and language that started in the GLUP and then at a later time migrated out of the GLUP. The Affordable Housing Master Plan is one that comes to mind, where we used to keep our affordable housing policies in the GLUP, and now it has its own comprehensive plan element. So that could be something that happens with the public facility map. It's in here, and then it moves into its own element at another time. So while the current version of the GLUP map does label a number of public facilities, this is more for the purposes of wayfinding and noting landmarks. So if if you're looking for something on the map and you say, oh, it's across from this school or it's across from this fire station. There's never been a comprehensive list or map of facilities that is in the GLUP. So the proposed map is modeled on the public facilities inventory that was included in the 2015 Community Facilities Study report. And staff is proposing that it's a separate public facilities map that adopted as part of the GLUP rather than notations on the primary GLUP map, with the reasoning that adding all public facilities to the GLUP map would probably detract from the purpose of the GLUP map, which is to convey general land use recommendations, and we don't want to muddy that up too much. So one of the main reasons for bringing this information into the GLUP with the reprint is to provide a baseline of public facility information that could facilitate the state-mandated 2232 review process, which I'm familiar with. And that requires public facilities to be features shown on an adopted comprehensive plan, or that the general location, character, and extent of those facilities be in substantial accord with the comp plan. So I understand that the commission has an interest in exploring the 2232 review process further. I'll tell you that an interdepartmental staff team is currently developing draft procedures that staff and the Planning Commission could use in those reviews. Those draft procedures would be discussed with LRPC and ultimately brought to the Planning Commission before they're adopted administratively. And that would probably be in the next 3 to 4 months. I say that because those procedures are still in development. I think it would be premature to discuss them too much in detail tonight. So we are saying that part of the reason for doing this now with the GLUP reprint is to facilitate those reviews, but we'll talk in the coming months further about how that might happen. And also, this is something, the map and the table are not intended to be something that's static. So we expect that they would be amended periodically to reflect any planned changes to facilities. So if the county board or the school board were to take action on a new facility or relocating a facility, we could amend the map, and that would go through the normal comprehensive plan amendment process, and it would require Planning Commission and County Board public hearings and action. So what's included in the map? It's county and APS facilities that are not shown in other comprehensive plan elements. So that's roughly 120 facilities that are on the list and on the map. And we're documenting existing facilities and those that are under construction or funded. So examples are the Lebaron Community Center that's under construction, the new elementary school at the Walter Reed site that's under construction, the Longbridge Aquatic Center is another one under construction. Those are all shown on the map. Information, the information that's provided in the table, and you can see the table, it's at the very end of the staff report, sort of as an appendix to the GLUP booklet. I think, following the RTA, we'll integrate it once it's been sort of completed, integrated into the GLUP booklet for adoption in February. But you can see the information there. We have the name, the address, a primary use category and additional use categories, and the acreage, which if you're looking at it, you can see the acreage is still being worked out, but we'll have that in time for adoption. And I'll also note that some of the facilities that are co-located, either they're in the same building or they're very close to each other, or for example, the trade center and the water pollution control plant, where we have a lot of different buildings sort of within the same campus or site. Those have been combined as a single dot on the map and in the table. And then there's multiple use categories that are listed in the table. So I just said what is included, what's not included in the map and the table, and that's primarily public facilities that are already in other comp plan elements. So parks are in the public spaces master plan. Recycling centers have their own map that's a comprehensive plan element. The transportation networks, and of course our utilities, water, sewer, and stormwater, they each have their own comprehensive plan elements. So those are not brought in here. Now there is one exception to this, which is the community centers, which are all listed in the public spaces master plan. When we did our very first draft of this, we excluded those to kind of stay true to our rule of nothing being duplicated. And because so many of those community centers are co-located with other facilities, then we were showing some of them and not showing some of them, and it just seemed awkward, so we brought them all in. So the community centers are all shown on the map. What else is not included? Publicly owned land that does not contain an existing or a planned facility. So the county, and less so APS, does have some land that was acquired for whatever reason, and either a long time ago or recently, and because it's very small and you can't really do anything with it, or it's relatively new. The example would be the Virginia Hospital Center urgent care facility that was part of the land swap for the Edison site. The county just recently acquired that, There's not a county board approved plan or use for that site, so that's not shown on the public facility map. The next example of what's not included would be regional, state, and federal facilities. At a future point, we could add those in. It might be a bit resource intensive to start keeping track of what other governmental agencies are doing with all of their facilities, particularly when we don't really control land use for many of them. And then finally, any county or APS facilities that are located outside of the county, which there are some of those, they're not shown on the map. We have 8 use categories, and these are broad use categories sort of based on what was in the community facilities study, but further refined, consolidated somewhat. We don't, for example, for operations, we don't have separate APS operations and county operations. This is part of the general land use plan, so we're focused more on land use than whether it's a APS operations facility or a county operations facility. But our categories are administration, education, human services, libraries, operations, public parking, and if you go through the table, you see there's only a few public parking, and it's things like the Ballston Garage, which are not primarily serving a single facility, but are standalone, generally parking areas. Public safety and recreation and cultural. So we were not able to include the map because it's quite large in your printout. So here's a detail, just seeing what it looks like with the dots and the labels. So this is looking generally in the Arlington Heights and the Penrose area, a detail. Some of the facilities on here are the Fleet Elementary School, Jefferson Middle School, the Career Center site, all the different facilities there, Fire Station number 1, Syfax and Sequoia up in the upper right corner. And I'm going to hand it back to Kelly.
Thank you. So just to wrap up, in terms of next steps, we are moving toward the request to advertise with the county board this month, and then February 2020, looking for final consideration by the Planning Commission and the county board. And with that, we're happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentations. Madam Clerk, do we have any public speakers? It doesn't appear we have any commissions with us. So now I'll turn to our LRPC Chair, Commissioner Giacomini, for her report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a very brief report. I think staff did a excellent job going through the slides, enumerating the changes that have been proposed and their explanation as to why. And that is exactly how we proceeded at the LRPC meeting. Probably the best points for discussion is just to confirm the removal of the general commercial designation. I don't have any for the GLUT booklet. For the new public facilities component, I think that's, since it is new, that's something that we may want to delve into a little more. Again, talking about what are included on it and what are not and why. We have staff's rationale about if something is in and another element of the comp plan. I think we've gone back and forth a little bit about parks and how that might work. Again, how should parks be treated? How is it to be used with the other comprehensive plan elements? How might it change in the future? Will it be updated with new facilities when they are approved, or when funded, or when built, or when put into the CIP? I'm not quite sure how that's going to work. How often will it be updated? Will it be the same as the GLUT map? And what other information would be useful in the accompanying table? And do the use categories in the table make sense? And that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Giacomini. So we have some of the items she just walked through. So confirmation on the removal of general commercial, some discussion on the public facilities map, how it's updated, and what triggers that? So there's a number of questions there, and then the categories for the public facilities. Other topics that people would like to discuss? Commissioner Hughes.
Ultimately, how it's printed and how is it advertised to the community?
Okay. Others? All right. So with that, let's start with the top. And any questions on the removal of the general commercial GLUP designation? I think the background here was we only had one site that, the Wendy's site, that was the last 4 or 5 years ago, I think. So right after, I think, the last reprint, right? Any questions on this? Commissioner McSweeney.
I think we may have discussed this at the meeting, but in terms of historical use of this category, I wonder if sometimes it isn't useful to have the information retained, even though you actually don't have a land use category that's, or land that's using it. So I was wondering if you could talk to historic maps. I know they're available, but they're a little hard to read, so.
So the historic versions of the general land use plan are available online. We have a web page for the general land use plan, and there is a link there to all of the historic documents. Certainly those maps that were printed before the map was digitized are challenging to read. I would recommend that moving forward, we do the same thing with the 2011 map, that we archive that on the webpage so that it can be referenced. We certainly, as staff, use the historic maps all the time to do research, so we wouldn't want to lose sight of any of the previous designations.
Other questions on this or comments? Commissioner Yakimi.
The one thing I didn't put down about the GLUP booklet, and since we're talking about how things can live for a while, since there are going to be substantial changes to the GLUP booklet, will we be able to keep the current version alive online in case people want to do some research on it, just as we use the former GLUP maps?
I would recommend we do that as well, yes.
Thank you.
All right. Not any other questions on general commercial. Let's move on to, excuse me, the updated or the new public facilities map. Commissioner Lantelmi.
First off, I think it's a great idea. Wonderful that we're doing this. So any comments I have in the context of this is good. You mentioned that there is not the water infrastructure being included. So that means on the map, it will not have the sewage treatment plant?
The water pollution control plan is included on there because that's a big facility.
Okay.
But
And-
you know, things like small reservoirs and
So it wouldn't have the water towers or things like that?
right, and those are included in the water distribution master plan.
Okay, but the water treatment plant is on the thing?
Yes.
Okay, great. Are rented facilities included?
Yes.
So this building's included, the Thurgood Marshall School is included, things
Yes.
like that?
Yes.
Okay, good. Those are my questions.
Yeah, so the water isn't included because of kind of homeland security issues. Is that kind of the thinking there? I know this is a ongoing
right,
thing.
primarily because those facilities live in another comprehensive plan element, and just sort of to avoid being duplicative. But also, yes, those reasons come into play. The water distribution master plan is one of our plans that's not online.
Right.
It's publicly available, but less so.
Sure.
So we can access that, we just can't do it online?
Right.
Okay, because, water treatment plants are fairly obvious. It's not as though it's,
It's less that,
Not
but
a
it's
secret.
where some of the other water facilities are.
As is that 48-inch main on Glebe.
Yeah. Commissioner McSweeney?
We had an interesting discussion, I think, at the meeting, the LRPC meeting about this, and it was about the parks. And even though the parks are not included, facilities within parks are included because they're facilities. Parks are located in the public spaces master plan, but due to an error you explained to us, in the map, the green spaces that represent the parks are still there. And I think both Commissioner Giacomini and I were very pleased that they were still there, and we'd like them to continue to be there. But I didn't know if other commissioners had a comment on that, or if you wanted to explain that any further.
Yeah, so I can address that, and we did discuss that at the LRPC map. And I'm going to try not to confuse you on this because it's a little convoluted. There was an earlier draft of the public facilities map that was shared at the LRPC meeting, and it included the parks. They were not labeled, and there were not dots for them. It was just a green layer showing where the parks were. And I had indicated at that meeting that we're working with other technical staff on producing the maps for us, and that was an error, and we had not intended to include them on there. And then once they showed up, I think staff and LRPC members collectively said, well, it's helpful, at least for wayfinding purposes, to understand the relationship of the facilities to the parks. And then a second draft of the map, which is the one that's before you tonight, was again produced. And in that version, the parks were left off, again, inadvertently, or perhaps following the initial direction. I'll take the blame for perhaps being unclear, but it is our intent, I think, to include the maps, to include the parks only for information purposes and only for wayfinding. So there would be a notation on there, just like the streets are included on the map. And without the streets, the map would be unreadable.
Right.
So the park helps with that legibility.
Yeah. Thank you. I thank you very much for explaining that, and also for making sure that the green space is located on the map.
Commissioner Hughes and then Commissioner Gearing.
Thank you. I want to lead with how Commissioner Lynn told me this is an incredible improvement. So first of all, to staff on that, thank you. I think, one, adding the green layer is important, and number two, I would encourage you to think about adding the hashtags for the public ownership. I think that gives perspective to where we're using leased space and where we're using owned space, and helps the community understand better sort of how the public facilities process goes forward. I do have like a horror story in my mind, and I want to just make sure I understand what's going to happen from staff. So you mentioned earlier the recycling centers and their own maps, and I'm having a flashback to the recycling center on Columbia Pike at the corner of it's near Arlington Mill, basically. And for years, the Douglas Park community desperately wanted to get it off of the parking lot there. And not that staff isn't busy with lots of things, but at the time, it wasn't able to reach the top of the staff queue to do the GLUP amendment, which had to happen before the guys at the DES could actually remove the recycling bins. I offered to take a six-pack down to the Trade Center and get them removed. Mary Hines said not to do that, but I thought it would be a great idea at the time. So from staff's perspective, though, let's just look at the current climate right now. I don't know what the school board's going to do, but there's 7 different schools they're talking about playing juggling balls, and you've put on the map D3 sits as McKinley, and I don't know if McKinley keeps McKinley or if McKinley moves. Who knows what the names go on? So are we boxing ourselves in where I love seeing staff, but every month we're going to have to do a public facilities map change where D3 changes to D14 and D14 moves here, or not?
I also do not want to be before you every month with requests to advertise and adoptions of changing D3 to D4. So we will, as I mentioned, we anticipate that the map can be amended. I think the appropriate time to do that is something that we will consider carefully as staff, and it could be as CIP decisions are made, which happen every 2 years, or it could be as other the changes would be as a result of the county board or the school board making some action. And in the case of the recycling center on Columbia Pike, that action was not what was holding up that facility from being moved off that site was not the fact that it was shown on the map. It was the fact that a use permit and an amendment would needed to be made for the for the relocation of that. So facilities could be closed without affecting this map. Obviously, we would want to come and make sure that we clean that up, but we wouldn't be able to say, well, you can't do a certain thing because the comprehensive plan says it's this other thing.
I hope that's how it works in practice. I mean, this is new for all of us. My inclination would go towards a broader characterization of the facilities, maybe with the header level, as I'm thinking to if you don't know, I love maps, so I have a lot of historical maps, and so I've got the 52 one, and it always helps me find like historical abnormalities throughout the community. And you know, it's got the little school with the little flag on the top, and then it's got the other, but I think this is a very detailed and excellent map. I'm just concerned that it's going to box us into a place we may not like to be.
I'll just say it's not our intent to box ourselves in, but your comment is noted.
Commissioner Guerin, and then Commissioner McSweeney.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Brown and Mr. Ladd. I like the elegance of these separate maps. And at the same time, I know whenever we have a planning issue, we want to know everything that's going on in a community. So can you tell me how you can see that still working? I'm assuming since it's electronic, let's say we had a special GLEP area, you would be able to put together a map that had everything on it for planning and discussion purposes.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you.
Commissioner McSweeney.
Thank you. I know that at the Joint Facilities Advisory Commission, there has been some question about, you know, what constitutes public, or how you define a public facility. And on this map, I was just curious, I'd be interested in probably hearing from other members of the commission. We have human services, but we don't necessarily have hospitals. And even though hospitals aren't owned by the county, are they important enough facilities to actually place here? And also public facilities that are outside of Arlington County. I know that I personally would like to see both those things on this map, but I was just curious if there were other things, what you thought of these, and if there are other things that, that could be included.
I would say that at the moment, we're focusing on public, meaning publicly operated or publicly owned or some combination of one of those two facilities. So something like a private hospital, a private hospice, you know, the private elder care facilities that you were discussing earlier. You know, we're not proposing to include those at this time. And I would also add, and I trying not to discuss 2232 too much, but we do have an eye towards what are the facilities that are, you know, that state code would require be consistent with the comp plan, and those private facilities wouldn't fall under that.
And public facilities outside of Arlington County do not fall under our purview either. They fall under the purview of the jurisdiction they're in.
Right. We might have to do a 2232 review in another jurisdiction to ensure that our public facility is consistent with their comprehensive plan.
Sounds fun.
Okay. Any other questions kind of about, yes, Commissioner, go ahead.
Since Mr. Ladd mentioned that possibly we'd think about updating the map maybe with the CIP cycle, I'm curious about when facilities are actually added. Is it when they're approved, or is it when they're funded, or when they're built, when it first appears in the CIP, which sort of is being approved? Although thinking of Lubber Run, that would have been in the CIP. We didn't get to actually doing approval of the rebuild until later. So how is that going to work?
I can't really answer that at this point, and I would say it will probably be case-by-case dependent. A number of the facilities would require a use permit or other action or other land use actions. So if that's the case, it would probably make sense to amend the map along with that. Other facilities are by right, but we go through a PFRC process. So, it could be in conjunction with that. But like I said, I think there's a number of different options and timing, and at the moment, we don't necessarily have a procedure for when we would do it for each facility type.
And remind me, in the CIP, I think there are maps that when there are things discussed in the CIP, they're located on a map somehow.
Usually,
I can't remember that, but I want to say so.
I don't believe they are.
Or maybe not. Maybe it's just that it's designated by an address or
It's
by
pretty
civic
tech-savvy.
association sometimes.
Right.
Okay, so I'm just trying to think again of people, the public, other commissions trying to use this just to plan or to think. The other thing they could go to would be the CIP, which is something neighborhoods, people are listening, they should do. When it's online, go and just do find for your neighborhood, and you'll see what the county may or may not be having planned for you in the next 10 or 20 years. So we do have that available to us rather than this map.
Right.
But I do urge staff to keep thinking about it, and I'm sure JFAC will work with you all on that too, as well as Planning Commission, so that we can use it, because it is a really great start, and I think it'll be something very, very useful for staff and citizens. So thank you for undertaking it.
Yeah, agreed. This is a great start. So thank you for your work on that. Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult thing that you're being tasked with, Mr. Ladd, to think through how to incorporate the public facilities on the map, because as some of the commissioners did note, folks do use it as a way to orient themselves, but the general land use plan is also an aspirational document. So how do you have kind of both of those things happening simultaneously? I'm sure you've thought of numerous things with your colleagues, but perhaps having different logos or things to denote what is a facility that's coming online in the future versus one that exists today. There's probably different ways of doing that, and your GIS folks, I'm sure, would have some recommendations. But I do think we want to see them both on the map, because for those different reasons of being able to orient yourself, but also understand what's coming, and more to come on that, I'm sure. But heartened to hear that we're at this point. I know we, as a commission, have been asking for this for a number of years, and so it's great to see that we're moving forward. Okay, are there other questions about the map, how it gets updated? We've had some questions on that so far. Do you want to move on to the categories, the different land use categories under public? Mr. Ladd, can you pull up that slide? That's great. Any questions on this?
Yes, I will.
Commissioner Lantomi.
Does fire come under public safety or just the police?
Yes, fire would come under public safety.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, seems pretty straightforward. Commissioner Hughes, you had a question about how the GLUP update gets advertised and how it's being made public?
Since we're not going to run late this evening, I will oblige. And you found out that I am a bit of a map fun. I love maps. I agree, it's a digital document. We live in a digital age. It's very important how it's presented digitally. I also think it's incredibly important to have the paper physical presentation of it. And more important for that paper physical presentation of the document to be spread throughout the community, especially as the reprinting of the GLUP helps signal the amount of planning we go through our community. I'm just reminded of all the false things that go through the world of planning in our community right now. And so for me, I would encourage staff as we move forward to think about, I know you're going to have we'll get the little email that has the link with the press release, and you'll have a new website link. But I also think staff should begin to think about how we can physically get the map out beyond the planning department and into the community, whether it be at libraries, community centers, or made available for pickup by people to actually own and have. I have a 1952 map of Arlington because at some point in time, somebody in 1952 walked by a county building and grabbed a big old map and stuck it in their attic, and I was lucky enough to come across it one day. In 60 years, digital archiving, we can hope, stays the same. But if we want to create the permanent record that, as you said, staff uses to go back, we actually physically have to print the document. And so my encouraging statement for staff now is to think about a strategy to actually get the physical poster board out to the community, the schools, the kids. Everybody needs to know the aspirational plans for how we think about developing our community, because we do think about it a lot. So that's all I wanted to say on that subject, because I don't want us to get to the actual document without staff they're all out there planning it. I really think that you guys should spend as much time about the physical presentation of it as you are about the digital presentation of it.
If you ever do need a map, he's your guy. He gave me a map, and I think he gave.
That was my those were my 1970s maps.
Not as
far
not as
more
precious.
easy to get.
Yeah, I think he gave Commissioner Ware a map. So if you ever need a map, Commissioner Hughes is your. Yes.
Yeah,
Ms.
and
Brown.
if I may, I actually have many copies of the 1964 map, I think, on my desk. So if anybody needs a 64 and 83, those, I guess, were printed in vast quantities, and we have some leftovers. So
That's
if you're
great.
missing those, let me know.
I know a number of things end up at Central Library. Are the GLUP maps one of those items?
I was going to say, I think it makes a lot of sense to distribute the maps at the libraries, and we can look at the community centers as well. I think that's a good idea to make sure that the public has an opportunity to take a look at it.
The schools too, at the Lee Highway Alliance is doing sort of planning classes at Dorothy Ham. It might be even useful we could get one for Lee Highway Alliance to use at the schools for those classes.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good idea. We'll take that down.
So the 64 map, by the way, is that the one that still has all the old expressways mapped on it that have been demapped? Because the 61 has, the 1960 map has the county laddered with expressways that were never built.
Yeah, you're putting me on the spot. I'm not exactly sure I
You haven't
remember
looked
what's on
at
the
it.
60.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I'm a map nerd too.
I'll be going by someone's desk in the not too distant future to collect.
Yeah, we can look at it together.
If you come back next week, we can have GLUP trivia night. All right, Commissioner Sweeney.
Just as a follow-up to Commissioner Hughes, once this map is actually approved in February, whenever it is, and if a civic association or a neighborhood group wanted to get a copy of the current map, could they make a request to the county, and would there be a charge? How does that actually work?
I know I said earlier that we will be focusing on our digital presence with the map and the booklet, but we will certainly print paper copies, for people to come in and pick one up if they need it. I just don't think we'll be printing them in the quantities that we've printed them in the past. So I'm not sure how the fees would work out, but we'll make sure that they're available for people who come in and would like to have one.
Other questions on? All right. Yes, Commissioner.
I just want to be sure, too, that the Central Library's history room, the room formerly known as the Virginia Room, it also gets copies. It would be helpful. Right, local history.
Historic Society?
I think because the library is more it's a public facility and very accessible, that's where I worry, because I know sometimes they come by their documents by citizens giving them to them rather than necessarily the county, and I think it would be a very good practice for them to receive that, because it's a nice place where people can go and research it easily.
Commissioner Hughes walking around with maps. Commissioner Hughes.
Just make sure it's a high quality printing and archival, the one you give to the good friends at the library.
All right. Are there any other things that people would like to discuss on this item? All right, then with that, Commissioner Giacomini, I'd like to recognize you to make a motion.
Thank you. I move the Planning Commission recommend the county board that they adopt the resolution attached to this draft staff report of November 18th, 2019, to authorize the advertisement of public hearings by the Planning Commission on February 10th, 2020, and by the County Board on February 22nd, 2020, to consider a reprinting of the General Land Use Plan GLUP map, including amendments approved since the last reprinting and other map updates, as shown in Attachment 1 and Attachment 2. B, reprinting of the General Land Use Plan GLUP booklet, as shown in Attachment 3. And C, adding a new GLUP public facility map and tables, as shown in Attachment 4 and Attachment 5.
Second.
I think, yeah, Commissioner McSweeney,
The last official act.
that was the quickest seconding of a motion I've ever heard. All right, any discussion? All right, hearing none, all in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Thank you both for your work, and we'll see you in February. And with that, we stand adjourned.